Well, welcome to everybody here. We have a ton of other agencies here, so whatever agency you're in, we appreciate what you do, and we just want to welcome you. And the fact that this is truly an interagency briefing. We have with us today, we have Ryan, Karen, and Greg. Each one of these folks are servicing the deaf community, and Ryan is a senior account executive. Karen is an author. Is that your book there, Karen, as well?
There is. I shamelessly touting a book on the history of communications access for people with disabilities, people who are deaf and hard of hearing, that is.
That is great. Appreciate you. And I can't wait to hear what you have to say. I learned a lot about the history of the deaf community and from you as we were planning this. And we have Greg Pollock. He's the VP of Business Development, so we appreciate you being here as well, Greg. And just so everybody knows, it's not affiliated or endorsed by any agency. GSA makes us say these things. Informational purposes only, and your participation in this briefing is voluntary, and it's not an indication or endorsement of or purchasing from any vendor. So now you can participate without having any problems. Speaking of participation, we love participation in multiple ways. So why did you decide to join us today? Are you in the deaf or hard of hearing community and you want to know about new technology? How about you want to learn about the technologies will help you communicate with the deaf community? Maybe you're in the hot seat, either with DEIA or customer experience. And then folks, look at that. Folks want to hire and accommodate deaf employees. What do you think of that, Greg?
Yes, I think that's really the most important thing here. And that's what we should be talking about, because we really want to close the employment gap for deaf and hard of hearing people and showing their value in the market.
Love it. And for all the Weisenheimers, you can pick My Boss Made Me Come. And then if you've ever been to a GovBrief session, we appreciate you guys joining us today. We love participation, absolutely love it. And we actually have a little bit of a way to be able to communicate, and that is how you do participate, right? So is that right, Greg? So we're going to learn a little bit, hopefully. We'll all learn a little bit. And you can chat, you can raise your hand, and you can pop things in the Q&A. We appreciate all that. We do have the session docs that are coming to you right now in the chat. And that includes a few links because the OPM DEIA strategic plan isn't in PDF format. So you just got to go on the web to get that. The guidance is in PDF format, which we included for you. And Karen's going to review some of these memoranda and some of the initiatives that the federal government's putting out for us to help the deaf community. And as far as the agenda goes, I'm going to introduce each one of these folks. We'll talk about the federal initiatives, understanding that there is, first of all, there is a deaf and hearing gap. And oftentimes we in the hearing community are not thinking of the impact of how we live our daily lives on the deaf community. And we'll talk about deaf communication services and talk about how it actually works, right, Greg? We're going to be actually diving into what it's like to have the deaf experience and what we can do to help improve that deaf experience, right, Greg?
Absolutely, Dave.
Appreciate it. And we'll be comparing some new technologies. There's a lot out there and some next steps that you can find. So I'm going to close. Let me close this poll and we'll take a look and see what we got here. 18% are in the deaf community. Fantastic. Glad that you're here today. And 79% want to learn more about the technologies. Got some folks that are on the hot seat for DEIA, and a lot of folks want to hire and accommodate deaf employees, which is exactly what we want. And we appreciate you guys joining us today. So we'll close that down. So tell us a little bit about CSD and how you guys got started. I know you're in Austin, Texas.
Thank you, Dave. So, really, the interesting fact, CSD actually got its start in South Dakota, Sioux Falls, South Dakota specifically, kind of a random place, but it's a fascinating history. So, this was before the TTY, before the TDD. You know, deaf people need to rely on their parents, their neighbors, their siblings to make phone calls for them. Simple things like calling for food or calling a family member, grandma and grandpa. It wasn't possible to do it themselves prior to the TTY. So when the TTY was developed in 1975, basically this man decided he wanted to build a relay center to utilize the TTY, having a hearing person typing on this computer, which would then speak and make the call to the hearing person that the deaf person was trying to call. So therefore, there was back and forth communication with a deaf person and a hearing person. And this basically started in a closet in South Dakota. So when the state of South Dakota saw this, they were like, this is fantastic. We're going to fund this with a grant and develop a relay center. And that became the first relay center and the first customer service experience for deaf and hard of hearing people to make phone calls. Fast forward, when the ADA was signed in 1990, and Karen will talk a little bit more about that in depth. But when the ADA was signed, Congress wanted to establish relay services nationwide. So CSD set up relay centers where we had operational centers, and we were hiring hearing people that just basically sat in a call center, waited for a deaf person to call through a TTY, and facilitated the communication via text, and then spoke to the hearing person and went as the third party intermediary. And that became a nationwide initiative that was funded by the FCC, the Federal Communication Commissions. And again, Karen will talk a little bit more about that. But now we fast forward a few more years. Technology has improved, and video communication became a standard. Webcams became normal in everybody's everyday life. So we partnered with Sprint to create a video phone, which was a video phone relay service, which is basically similar to what you're seeing here, where a deaf person calls an interpreter, the interpreter shows up on the screen, the deaf person can see the interpreter, the deaf person and the interpreter will communicate via sign, and then the interpreter will be on the phone speaking everything that the deaf person is signing, and then in turn signing everything that the hearing person is saying. And so basically you're having a third-party communication assistant in order to provide that communication. But this third-party approach, it's not ideal. It doesn't create an equitable experience. So therefore, CSD decided to sell off the VRS part of their company. They sold it off, and instead they set up a new concept, which is direct video calling. And we'll talk more about that as we continue with this briefing. The concept is simple. Why not hire a deaf and hard of hearing people to provide services in American Sign Language for deaf and hard of hearing people instead of utilizing a third-party communicator between the customer service person and the deaf person? The efficiency really is a solution that we have found that you will see here. So, we are in the business of solving communication barriers. In the last 50 years, deaf and hard of hearing people have always been looking for what's the next big thing? What's the next technology? And we've worked very close with the FCC for the last 50 years to improve these experiences for deaf and hard of hearing people throughout the United States and actually internationally as well.
And it is so awesome to have you here and to be able to experience this with you. We've spent a lot of time together, working together to create this. And I'm hoping that we as hearing people can get a better understanding of what life is really like. And to add on to what you have, you're a small business and a GSA contract holder. We'll talk about that later as well. But we also wanted to bring up that you also, as you service the deaf and hard of hearing community, it is a cross section of the United States, right? It includes all the different servicing all the different aspects of society, right? So it's not just white folks, it's not just black folks, it's everybody. It's a cross section, right? So you hire people too internally, right? So you're a representation of DEIA all the time, not just because you have the need for the A part and accessibility, but you actually have folks from across the spectrum that work for you and that you service, right?
Yes, exactly. You know, this is one of the fastest growing minority groups, the Pacific Asianers. And it's not just that, you know, we can hit all of the different minority groups as well. So we are finding people with disabilities in every minority segment of the world throughout our communities.
Love it. Love it. Love it. All right. So while we're doing this, we always love the polls and being able to get your feedback of what it is and what's important to you. So what is your role in the DEIA and customer experience? Are you in HR? You're in IT. There's a lot of IT components, right? Maybe you're in a call center and you're having to deal with all the different types of communication problems. If I could speak myself. And maybe you work with customers and constituents, or your agency is to make sure that you're compliant with the DEIA. And where are you in the chain? Because what I love about this is we do have directors and senior folks that are involved. This gives us some great exposure, Greg, to help them understand as well. Because we as hearing folks, I'm telling you, I was fascinated. My daughter, both of my daughters have some sign language. I don't have any. I don't even speak English well, much less another language well. But I really appreciate to be able to understand that. We're going to get into the federal initiatives in just a minute. And what I find interesting is just what happened here, where Amber's popping up while the other interpreter is leaving, right? So this creates part of the issue. We get to be able to see what's happening in the deaf community and some of the challenges. And you'll notice there's some delay when I ask a question of Greg. So this is great for us to be able to experience. And we appreciate you guys participating. We'll give you another 3, 2, 1. Any last minute stragglers for what's your role? There we go. Any last minute? All right. There we go. Here we go. Let's take a look. A lot of folks in HR. Ryan, how about that? We have a lot of folks in HR, and 29% are actually working. And then the other with customers and customer support, and 35% are making sure that they're compliant with the DEIA. And across the board, we have folks on the front line all the way up through. So we really appreciate them, don't we, Ryan, that they chose to spend some time with us today. I'm calling Ryan out so that he can chat for a second too. So there you go. All right. So federal initiatives. Karen, take us down this. You have been involved in this for quite some time. You're writing books and all that, but you were actually on the front lines, meeting with all the folks in Congress and twisting arms, I think, right?
Most definitely. And I'm so for those of you who have not met me before, I've been working in this field for 40 years, showing my age. In an advocacy capacity, and then as Deputy Bureau Chief of the Consumer Bureau at the FCC, overseeing disability policy under 2 administrations. So I've been a drafter of some of the legislation that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to take this basically take what Greg talked about and provide information from the federal legal perspective and how we got here. So Greg already mentioned that in 1975, TTYs were created. They're basically text telephone devices. Think of a keyboard, you type on it. But the problem is that in order to have a TTY to TTY call, both parties have to have a TTY. And that's why telecommunications relay services began and why we put it into the Americans with Disabilities Act as a requirement for all telephone companies to provide telephone TRS nationwide. So that was the initial requirement in the ADA, which required an intermediary. It required a third person. And actually, let me just specify, as I'm going to explain, there's nothing in the ADA that requires a third person. It requires just the ability to give people who are deaf and hard of hearing and speech disabled a telephone service that's, quote, functionally equivalent to what hearing people and voice users have. So there was nothing in the act that actually said there has to be an intermediary. And I can tell you, having been there, that actually originally Congress was upset with the thought of a third person being on the call. And for that reason, when it wrote the FCC, when it wrote the ADA, it made very clear that it wanted the commission to adopt future and innovative technologies that would be superior to relay going forward. It actually admonished the FCC, do not stay with the current technology. This is pretty much just a stopgap. You can see this in the legislative history. Let me just read to you. I'm reading an exact quote.
Just Karen, how long has that stopgap been?
That stopgap has been since the onset of relay services, which is 1993. Relay services began before that, but they were all voluntary or they were state-run.
Right.
Actual rules that the FCC put into effect went into effect in 1993. So we're talking about 30 years, over 30 years now.
30-year stopgap. There you go, ladies and gentlemen.
And that was because that was all the technology that existed, right? I mean, it was not that before the pandemic, hardly any of us used video, right, in communication. It's now commonplace. Everyone has a video phone or capability on their computers. So the times have changed. What the Senate report said was that although, and I want to read this verbatim, it said, although relay services represent the current state of the art, this legislation is not intended to discourage innovation regarding telecommunications services to individuals who have, at that term, the terminology they used, hearing and speech impairments, that's old terminology. And he explained that this community should be allowed to benefit from advancing technology. As such, the provisions of this section, the relay section, do not speak to entrench current technology, but rather to allow for new, more advanced and more efficient technology. And there's other statements as well of not having the effect of freezing technology or thwarting the introduction of superior or more efficient technology. So what did the FCC do with this language? Well, it said, okay, we have to go with the times. We have to go with new technologies. As Greg mentioned, video relay services came about in the early 2000s, as well as a few other forms of services. And this allows people to log into a website and get an interpreter like the one that you're seeing, although she is not working through VRS, but could have been working through VRS. And that interpreter interprets back and forth between somebody who uses ASL, American Sign Language, and a voice user. So the FCC listened to the commission, listened to the legislature, and it actually adopted IP, Internet Protocol versions of relay services, which is great. But at this point, we have tried to make the case that with video being ubiquitous, IP, Internet Protocol being ubiquitous, having an intermediary is no longer the most functional equivalent way of communicating. No one at this event would want to communicate through a third person when talking to a doctor, when talking to a lawyer, when talking to a government agency about Social Security or other benefits, when talking to IRS about taxes. Not only is it less accurate, it is burdensome. It takes longer. And I'm not going to go into all the benefits because I'm going to let Greg and Ryan do that, but the list is endless. Just imagine having to go through a third person. And that's the situation right now. So the important thing to remember is that English is not American Sign Language. They are different languages. American English is an oral and a written language. ASL, which is the primary language used by the deaf community in the United States, is a visual language with its own grammatical structure that is linguistically and culturally different, very different from English. So because DVC enables dialogue to take place between two people who both sign, for the first time, it allows ASL users to truly have the same experience as hearing people when trying to get assistance from government agencies. The FCC, when I mentioned I was at the commission, when I was at the commission in 2014 and 2015, we started looking at DVC and we decided that this is better than Relay. And so one of the things that we did was we launched our own ASL consumer support line, which still exists in the Disability Rights Office. We also developed an open platform. It's called the Accessible Communications for Everyone platform. It's an open source video calling platform that allows DVC to take place. And actually, FEMA is going to be using it in the future. So it makes it easier to eliminate that middleman and for government agencies to directly engage with ASL users. The FCC also ran an extensive outreach program about DVC. You can go on the FCC's website and type in direct video calling. You'll find all kinds of information. And perhaps most importantly, it created a way to approve DVC entities, because right now you have to go through the VRS numbering directory to be able to connect callers. And so it set up a whole set of rules governing privacy, security, reliability, and interoperability for approved entities to use DVC. It also granted CSD that approval. In the summer of 2023, just recently, it tasked its advisory committee that does disability access to develop recommendations on DVC. And one of the handouts I think you'll be getting are those recommendations that talk about all the benefits. One of the important things to remember here is that millions of minutes, the FCC did a study on this, are directed every year to federal government agencies with active and publicly facing call centers. Probably the most significant ones are SSA, IRS, the US Postal Service, OPM, and the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, as well as HHS. Also important to remember from a federal perspective is that there are two very applicable and important executive orders that have been issued that relate to this issue, kind of bookending why DVC should happen. The first is Executive Order 14035 on DEI and A, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the federal workforce, which I'm sure you know, talks about hiring more diversity in the workforce and providing accessible workplaces. The other one is just as important and pertinent. It's EO 14058, and it's called Transforming Federal Customer Experience and Service Delivery to Rebuild Trust in Government. It talks about needing to deliver services more equitably and effectively, especially for people who have been underserved, which would include historically underserved, include the deaf community, and modernizing government to use accessible, equitable, transparent, and responsive services. I could go on and on. You read through this and it just literally mirrors what DVC can do, including saving time for consumers and the government. So there have been various things that I, as an advocate, and the other organizations representing people who are deaf and hard of hearing that have been doing. We've been going to the FCC, asking them to expand the definition of relay services to include DVC. We've also gone to Congress. We've asked them also to do a pilot program in government agencies for DVC. We've also gone to Congress and introduced or arranged for the legislators to introduce something called the Communications, Video, and Technology Accessibility Act, which would define DVC as eligible for relay service support from a fund that the FCC oversees. But my messaging is, let's not wait. Let's not wait for federal agencies, for the FCC to move. Let's not wait for Congress to move. these executive orders show the need for this service. We have proven the need for this service. CSD will talk about more about that, Greg and Ryan. The time is now. There's no point in waiting to provide equitable service for this community. So
Couldn't agree more. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Karen.
I'm done for now.
You're done with it. So in the handouts, in the session docs that you have in the chat, you have access to the session docs. It'll take you to these initiatives, as well as the links to FCC for DVC guidance. And you'll even see some examples of this technology in use with the DVC YouTube, as well as the OPM DEIA strategic plan, and a link to ASL Now, which we will talk about in just a few minutes. What I find interesting is as I've been engaging with folks from CSD as we prepared this, it's been a very unique experience for me personally, and it opened my eyes to be able to see kind of how daily life is. Now, daily life for a deaf person, you live just like everybody else. It's not like you're sitting in a house someplace, right? So tell us about, you're doing that. You're going to national parks, you're flying, you're riding bicycles, you're driving, and you're actually paying taxes too, right? So take us through this, through your daily life.
Right. I always say that being a deaf person is a full-time job. Deaf people are unique in that we have an invisible disability. Let me share a personal story here. I went to an accessibility conference in California last year, and I got my hotel key. So I go to the elevator to go up to my room, and I'm standing behind, I'm a blind guy standing behind me, right? So he's trying to get to the elevator to push the button and wait. He hears the elevator door open, right? And he thinks he goes to the right elevator. The elevator door shuts and almost hits him, the blind guy. So then he backs up and is waiting. I kind of help the blind guy in the elevator. I'm feeling bad about it. And we both get into the elevator. I go to my room. That same night, there was a reception, the opening reception. The room was packed full of people. I see this same blind guy sitting in the middle of the room, chatting it up with all sorts of people. And I stand there in the corner of the room looking for the interpreter. I'm waiting to find the interpreter so I can start having conversations with people. It's just interesting how we had such vastly different challenges. His disability is a physical disability. My disability is a communication disability. And a lot of people don't realize that, and they box deaf people into the same accessibility category and think a one size fits all. But we have a communication disabilities. It's very different. So if I'm flying for business or personal, or, I drive to the airport. I drive myself to the airport. I go through TSA. I go to the gate, sit down, wait for my flight, all on my own, perfectly fine. The place where my disability shows up is when a gate agent makes an announcement, or if somebody's trying to talk to me. Maybe they announce that there's a 2-hour delay and everybody around me finds out. And I don't know unless somebody tells me. I'm relying on the person next to me to explain what's happening and what it is that I need to do next. This is my daily life.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I don't know about the rest of everybody else that lives in the hearing community. That was fantastic for me to hear. Wow. Just wow.
Can I just say something in there? I mean, what Ryan just talked about was having to depend on someone. And the beauty of DVC and the beauty of now our technology that's now available is that it eliminates that. It allows the deaf person to communicate directly with another deaf person in a call center who has been trained to work in that call center.
Exactly.
Be completely independent, self-sufficient, self-empowered, and know that what they are saying is what the person is receiving. And as a hearing person who signs myself, I can tell you that many, many times I watch interpreters get it wrong. Not the two on this call, they're wonderful, but it's very frustrating to me because I sign to know when a deaf person is not getting the communication that they should be getting.
So true. And that's what creates this gap. And I love what you said, Ryan, that there's certain disabilities, physical disabilities. Yours is a communication disability. You live life. You live life, and then you run into obstacles because of the inability to communicate, not from any fault of your own, but the rest of society, right? So when we have examples here of TSA, we have police officers getting pulled over. You guys get pulled over for speeding too, don't you? Don't you? We do. I know you do.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have to go to court, and you have to visit the doctor, and you did get some communication via about COVID. I don't know what that was about. I don't know if anybody else heard about that here, but I just want us to think about this for a second. How would you feel? And Karen was talking about it. How would you feel if every time you had to talk to a third person to talk about highly personal things like social security numbers? And I pulled this one for Elvis just in case you wanted to steal Elvis's identity, just so you could do that. But your banking information and health issues. I mean, and Ryan's story about being in a huge room and being unable to know anything that was happening there. That's an incredible problem. Go ahead, Greg.
So true story, Dave. True story, Dave. I face these kinds of things every day. In fact, right now it's tax season, right? And we all have to do our civic duty. And I have nightmares about it because last year when I called the IRS, because I had some questions about my taxes, a little bit of context before I continue with this story. The way VRS works is the interpreters are funded by the FCC. The FCC is required to allow interpreters to be first come, first serve, meaning I don't get to choose my interpreter. They are just whatever operators sitting in a big room waiting for a deaf person to make a call, and they pick up the next call, just like your regular customer service operators that you might have. So, I see this person on my screen that I've never met before in my life. And 3 times there's an IVR to get into the IRS, and it asks, what is your social security number? And so I punched in my social security number. But then it didn't understand. It asked me to repeat it. So I punched in my social security number once again. And then the interpreter said, you said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Is that correct? And I'm watching this guy who I've never met before give out my social security number. I freak out a little bit. And then I finally get a live representative, and they ask me to re-verify my social security number. And then they ask me other questions regarding my address, my email, all of these things. And I'm giving all of this information to the IRS rep to authenticate me, but I'm also giving it to some random VRS person that I've never met. I don't know who they are. They don't work for the IRS. They now have access to my entire life's information. So, when they are off the clock, did they write down my information? Do they have all of my life information to get through? I worry about that with every call that I make. Those are my risks that I have to take on. It's a gamble that I have to do. Do I get a good interpreter? It might be a good interpreter, but they have negative intentions. It's really my experience on a regular basis.
I can't imagine that. And so to your point, and I'll say this, Frank Bird says, as a hearing impaired person, a daily challenge is people who speak quietly, or even after you inform them of your challenge, they're still speaking that way. And for folks that are here, I know Ryan and everybody's different, by the way, because I've talked with Ryan and I've talked with Greg about this, and I got to tell you, can I tell this story from yesterday, Greg? Can I tell it? Is it okay?
Go.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
we're planning this. We're pulling this thing together, and we had in the limited talent pool is where I'm headed with this. So we're trying to pull this together so that we can communicate effectively with you some of the challenges. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the amount of time and redoing what was happening through the interpreter back and forth. It was clear that let's just say that the talent level was not certainly nowhere near the level we're at today to be able to communicate. And there was such a delay and such a challenge and high frustration. Is that is that okay for me to be able to say, Greg? Because I'm telling you, it was painful to do and to try to make it work. And other folks are experiencing the same thing and figuring out if it's accurate. And the other part that I think is interesting, and Greg and I, because Greg, we do talk. You do speak. So a lot of times we're doing things together, and so you're reading captions and things like that, which is cool. Oh, by the way, I totally forgot. Your tie is the best tie ever on GovBrief. I'm just saying, ladies and gentlemen, best dressed guy I've ever seen. He disappeared for a few minutes and then he popped back up. I'm like, I wasn't even paying attention until I looked at him. Like, nobody's ever posted here on GovBrief with a fantastic bow tie. So there you go. But getting back to the issues, Greg, what is it like for you to have to re-explain yourself over and over to try to get your point across?
I'm going to build off of this, but I think Karen wanted to add something. But first, let me throw this out. Obviously, not all interpreters are created equally. The advantage of Sharon and Amber, our interpreters today that you're seeing, is that they are trained. They also know CSD. They know what we do. They're very familiar with the jargon, the laws, the regulations, etc. But not all interpreters have the same luxury. An interpreter who is just sitting in a call center waiting for a deaf person to make a call, it could be 911 because they saw something in an accident and it's very traumatized. And then the next call, maybe they're supporting somebody with their taxes. And so their mindset of all of this and the psychology of all of this is really, turmoil. And so what they get is random. What you see with the interpreters here today, they were specifically selected for this. And so I want to make sure because I wanted to make sure that our message is clear to you. But it's frustrating when you get an interpreter that has no idea what you're trying to share, what you're trying to say. And then, of course, they change their voice. And, the sound of a voice has a lot of power. An interpreter needs to be able to represent the deaf person in that, with their intellectual level, with their level of comprehension. It can be very frustrating, this experience utilizing a random interpreter.
And you mentioned power, the power that somebody has to really mess things up for you. Really. What do you got there,
absolutely.
Karen?
So I wanted to just mention a couple of things. I wanted to clarify for anybody that's totally new to this issue that DVC is not a replacement for all VRS calls, that there is still going to be individual one-on-one calls, that we're really focusing on enabling callers with who are deaf or hard of hearing who sign to engage in real-time direct video communication in ASL with ASL speakers or representatives who have been hired by call centers. Okay, so I want to make very clear it allows direct communications in those situations. I also just wanted to add a couple of things. Even when interpreters are good, people who sign, deaf people who sign, their signing styles are very different from one another. I can understand some people, I can't understand others. Even the best interpreters are going to get some things wrong. And I also wanted to add that it just as it is frustrating for the consumer when you have to go through an intermediary, it's frustrating for the agency as well. When I worked at the FCC, our call when we shifted over to an ASL line in our disability rights office, we found that the length of calls were reduced by 42%
Mm.
using DVC versus VRS, video relay service. So it was a wild success in terms of efficiency. Well, any agency is going to benefit from this as well.
I love that. And I think everybody,
add
for the most
one
part,
thing.
you always have knuckleheads out there, right?
This is Ryan.
But just about everybody that's here. One second, Ryan. As human beings, we want to help. We want to help, and we want to communicate effectively. Go ahead, Ryan. I'm sorry.
Sure. So it's easy for us to focus on the interpreter when we're talking about communication challenges, but I really want to point out that English is oftentimes deaf people's second or third language. For example, we support the state of Virginia's COVID hotline in 2020 and 2021. And we had some calls from deaf callers asking us to read information from the website to basically translate it to them in ASL. Because at the time they were talking about bleach as a solution for COVID. And we got calls from deaf callers asking, okay, so should I start putting bleach in my mask? Because their English, English wasn't their first language, and their command of English wasn't strong enough that they were just putting things together and having a completely misunderstanding. So, yeah, they were trying to get information from the website, and just very interesting. Not a great solution.
So this is Greg. Also, a very important point that I wanted to expand on what Ryan was talking about is, let's say you're the Department of Health or you're the Department of Justice. You would not allow someone who wasn't a trained representative in your organization to answer questions. You would not allow someone who doesn't have the appropriate credentials to provide information to customers. You're taking a risk by using VRS. So if you have, for example, let's say an attorney who decides to play doctor for the CDC regarding what's happening with those customers, you've got a training issue between them. But at the same time, your agencies are willing to allow random VRS representatives to provide information and to share the message that you're sending out that you really want credentialed people to do instead. Again, it's not about the interpreters themselves. Some interpreters are trained and they're really good at what they do, but it's about how that they are prepared to provide that information, which is why I think it's crucial for every organization to be responsible for communication information. For, if you're processing anything that is legal or otherwise, you need to have trained reps that are providing this information in this context to the customers. Otherwise, the risks are high: legal risks, health risks, life or death risks, or even in an emergency situation, how to ensure that you're following the proper procedures in a particular situation. It's very critical to look at things from that lens and to understand that, as a deaf person, I understand that information through a lens, but I'm getting it from another person. And that other person and their level of understanding of that lens, of what's being signed by me, what's being said by you, it really does cause challenges.
And how good, just a shout out to our interpreters. How good is she being able to, with the nuances of the hearing, to be able to hear the heart of Greg? Great job. That's a great job. So just for us I really appreciate this for me personally and for the folks that are hearing. We need to improve the deaf experience. This is amazing, by the way. 93% of the deaf community want a direct connection. That means they don't want to go through, no offense to you, Amber. They don't want to go through an interpreter. They deserve equal access. Everybody agree with that? And because the technology, COVID put us all here, ladies and gentlemen, we are here. We're all benefiting from the fact that we are forced into this type of video conferencing, which before COVID, we were kind of dabbling into it, but it's improved everywhere else except for the deaf and hard of hearing. And hey, a lot of folks here are asking the same thing. How do we hire and train deaf customer service representatives so that we can best, as agencies, provide the services that are there? And I couldn't agree with you more. There's no reason to wait, right, Karen? There's no reason to wait.
Yeah, there's no reason to wait. It's a proven concept. It's being provided by private entities. It's being provided by the 988 suicide hotline. Being provided by the FCC, as I mentioned, and the Federal Emergency Management Authority is also going to be providing it, hopefully within the year. So it's taking on, it's getting acceptance. However, we need to have more acceptance. We need federal agencies, especially those that receive many calls, although even those that receive a few calls, arrangements can be made to use single individuals from multiple agencies. There are ways to do this that will vastly, vastly empower deaf individuals to the same extent as their hearing counterparts to have one-on-one conversations in their own language and experience a whole new level of cultural connection with the government agencies from whom they receive service.
And we're always going to need interpreters like Amber, right? Because hearing folks, you know.
Well, not everybody's a customer service entity, right?
That's true.
Service center. So we're always going to need interpreters and we're always going to need VRS, at least for the time being, until avatars take over. But that's, we're not there yet.
We're not quite there yet. All right. So we do have the next poll, which is what technology are you using now? Is it back in TTY and telecommunications relay? A lot of folks, that's the agency experience we have, right, Karen? There's still that happening.
Relay.
There you go. So let us know what you got, and have you ever heard of DVC before today? And I love the fact that so far nobody's heard about it, which is fantastic, right, Greg, with the fancy tie?
Yes. You know, and it's so important because we're so used to what we've been doing for such a long time that it's really hard to fathom that we could just hire a deaf person to talk with our other deaf people and make this communication work. And to expand on Karen's point, as she had mentioned before, as long as there are deaf people, there will always be interpreters, and interpreters will have jobs. There will always have a need for them. You know, because I still have to go to my parent-teacher organization conferences. I still have to go to soccer practice. I still have to do all of these other things as a deaf person. But what we haven't done is create jobs for deaf people. And this is a great way to do that.
Awesome. I love, love, love that. So we'll keep that open for another minute. While we're looking at this, let's just look at what you have to deal with. And there's a lot of different ways that we are now communicating and doing customer service for everybody with chat and email support and social media, all those. But when you get into the difficulties and the pain points for you as a deaf individual, tell us a little bit more about, we're looking at Zoom now. We're all on Zoom right now. But a lot of the technology we're talking about is the dial. How many of us remember the dialing? Actually, that. Crazy.
Oh, I do. So, Dave.
Yes.
I think that we've seen a transition in technology in so many different ways. Customers, companies, government agencies are looking at ways to better manage the volume of the calls that they're receiving and the volume of traffic. And they're looking at AI as a solution, how to automate call systems, trying to encourage people to use the automated system instead of the live representative. I don't think it's working very well because I don't know if any of you like me, you just always push 0 the minute you get the IVR just to get the live representative. It's just an automatic thing. But honestly, it is something. We are people and people like people.
That's right.
So
It's
to have email support, you have chat support, which, okay, chat's kind of impersonal. You have social media, which honestly is not a great tool for engagement purposes. There are subtitles, which is a solution, not the solution, but a solution. And now, Dave, to your point, we have this video-based communication, DVC, which is transforming the way that we can engage with others. Customer service, though, hasn't gotten there yet. And I don't know why. I can't give you an answer for that and why they're not utilizing it yet. But we are in a place now where, people are still trying to call. People are still trying to reach out to customer service to talk with a person. The problem is the experience hasn't changed or matured for deaf people, at least not as of yet, since 1975. We are still limited in the way we can connect.
A little gap.
Yeah. The TTY was cool because everybody had a TTY. And, in companies, government agencies, everybody had TTYs. But the technology has changed and the TTY has stayed. We're now utilizing VRS service. VRS Relay has become the stopgap. And I think the situation is we've matured again in our technology to the point where we can have direct personal communication, just like our hearing counterparts that they do when they make a phone call to their to other hearing representatives.
I love it, love it, love it. And we do have a hard stop with the interpreters because guess what? They can only go for so long. That's the rules. So if you want to check out ASL Now, it's what CSD has put together for direct video calling. It helps support the deaf community. The handouts, it's in the handouts. You can click that so you can see more on that. I love the fact that it meets the direct connection for 93% of the deaf folks, as well as lowering the times. The aggravation level goes down. And I'll tell you this, and you can speak to this a little bit real quick, Karen. The benefits of this is not coming from CSD. It's coming from the FCC and what we're seeing, right? This is what FCC is putting out.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned before, we looked at this back in 2015 and they're still looking at it. And they've emphasized that it reduces errors, it increases privacy, it increases efficiency. And with millions of calls being handled by government agencies, its time has come. And why isn't it available now? Well, again, COVID is not that old. It's still around, actually. So this is fairly new, but its time has come, and there's no point at this point to wait any longer.
Couldn't agree more. This right here for avoiding miscommunications is positively one of the biggest parts, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's critical. I mean, again, I watch miscommunications take place all the time. Again, it's not always the fault of the interpreter. Everybody has a different signing style, just like people who speak have different accents. Depends on what region you're coming from. Especially if you're using technical jargon. So you try to contact your cable company or your computer, your internet company, and try to fix a technical glitch directly. And you know what you go through. You know that you're on the phone for about an hour. Try doing it through a third person. I could not even begin to imagine. Or again, having a telehealth call perhaps, or
No doubt.
that's more of a direct call, but contacting any kind of health authority for information that has a customer service line. It is so much more complicated, and there are so many more opportunities for errors.
So what I love about this is I think everybody here would agree that we're now seeing it. We see that there is a hearing gap, and we can all work together to bridge the gap. We have video calling, direct video calling technology that's available today, and providing opportunities for customer service for deaf people, and being able to present your agency as a strong commitment to diversity, cross-cultural communications, and inclusion of everybody, and training your team how to best service the deaf community. CSD's great resource. Great resource. They're highly knowledgeable. They've been doing it since 1975 on the same technology that we've been talking about since 1975. You can make a difference. And real quick, we'll get everybody out here before the interpreters have to roll. So next steps, engage your team, your DEIA and your customer experience team. Schedule a meeting with these folks to help address your needs, review your processes, enhance your customer service experience with the deaf community, and leverage the experience that these folks have. Oh my gosh, Karen has been in it. We didn't even get to talk about Deaf President, which is a really cool thing that I didn't even remember. But I remember the deaf community becoming into the light, and that was because of an issue within their own community and the hard of hearing community. It is awesome. We want to make sure we get this to everybody before we get out. I'm going to make sure that, continuing the conversation, if you'd like to discuss using DVC in your agency, these are the guys to do it with. If you'd like to participate in a DVC pilot, guess what? These folks can help you with that as well. And if you would like to be part of the next and continue the conversation, always love that. Right, Greg? We love to have people continue to participate in the conversation. And before we get out of here, procurement options, I mentioned earlier, you're under no obligation to purchase from anybody that's a vendor on this call. But if you wanna, you can, because these guys have been in it for a long time. They have a GSA contract, and if you need to run it through procurement to get things faster, they have partners that can help with that as well. So please use these folks, leverage this. Included in these resources, you'll get a recap recording of this. You'll get the session docs, which have been handed out multiple times. You can click all those links, and you can schedule one-on-one meetings with the folks here, including pilot programs. And before Amber has to go, thank you. Is that how we do it? Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Awesome. You can communicate with these guys as well. And Amber, if you have to jump and whoever else has to go, great. Craig was talking about responsible for training, career development. Is there a list of resources available? Great question, Craig. We'll take a look for that as well. Definitely reach out to these characters because they know what they're doing in the deaf community. And we got all kind of applause. So we've got to jump, ladies and gentlemen. Awesome job.
Thank you.
Ryan,
Thank you so much.
awesome. Thanks so much.